Before you begin using Git to manage your project or using the different commands that comes with Git, one very important thing you want to do is to configure Git. By configuring Git, you can set some default behaviors or preferences that you would like when using Git, and you can also tell Git who you are. So that way, when you make a change or you make different versions of a project, Git can say, I remember it was this person who made that change. And there are a lot of options you can use to configure Git. But in this lesson, I'll be showing you some of the basic options that you can configure in Git to get started with using Git. When it comes to configuring Git, you can either do that on a global level or on a local level. The configuration on the global level would apply to all projects that you use Git for. So in my case, I have this global git config file. Now I've been using Git for a while now, which is why I have this global file, but you probably won't have this global file. This global file is located in users/Dillion Megida, but you probably won't have this file if you just created Git, but I'm going to show you how to create this file in a second. And for the local config, I have this. Now this local config is going to be created in this .git directory, and it will be created by default when you do git init. So I didn't have to create this file. This was created automatically. So here I can configure Git in specific ways. And you should also note that whatever configuration I have here, that option would override an existing option in the global config. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense. I'll show you some examples. So you have the global git config, and then you have this config, which is going to be specific to this git course project. Now, how do you create this git config file? Well, you can go to the root of your device. Maybe the root for you is user/your name or whatever that may be. You can create this .git config, and then you can specify different options, or you can use the git config command. And before I show you how the git config command works, let's just go through a few of this configuration I already have on my own device. So I have this user object, and in this object I have a property name. This is my name and my surname. I have email, and this is my email. Now this way Git would know who I am, and when I make changes or make different versions of my project, Git can associate those versions with me. So if somebody else in the future wants to know who made specific changes, Git can be able to provide that information because I provided this information before I made that change. We also have the fetch object here, and don't worry about what this means. We'll look at this in another lesson. You also have alias. Here you can specify different aliases. Aliases are just a shorter way to write Git commands. So for example, instead of writing this long command here, I can just alias it with delete local merged, and now I can say git delete local merged, and Git would then run this for me. So that's the idea of aliases. As we progress in this lesson, we're going to create a couple of aliases. I also have this alias called empty, and that allows me to run this command. So instead of typing this, I can just type git empty. And here we have this core object, and there are a lot of properties you can configure in this object. One of the properties I configured here is the editor, and here I'm using code for VS Code. So when Git wants me to enter a specific message, it's going to use VS Code. But maybe your code editor is Sublime Text, is Atom, or is something else. You can also tell Git, if you want me to type a message, use this editor instead. Then you have this init object, and here you have a property called default branch, and my default branch is main. You can specify your default branch to be something else, and don't worry if you don't understand branches, there's going to be a lesson for branches. And then you also have this here, and I'm going to skip that for now. Don't worry about it. Okay, so coming back to the git config command. So you can have git config, and then if you specify global, it means that you want to add to your global configuration. But if you don't specify global, then it's going to add that configuration to this config here. So let's do it without the global for now. So here I can say git config user.name, and I can enter Deeecode. Can also do git config user.email, and I can say deeecode@gmail.com. Now, if I should go to this config file here for this project, you can see that it has added this user here. So you can either come to this file and enter the text directly if you want, or you can use this command to enter that text for you. Now let's say I use the global command. Let's say I do git config global then user.name and I just enter random, and I do git config global user.email random@gmail.com. Now you can see that this one stays here because this command I just ran was for the global config. But if we go to the global config, you can see the name has now changed to random and the email has changed to this. But I'm just going to Ctrl Z it back to my name and my email because that is actually who I am. I am not random. Like I said, you can also configure the default editor that you want to use Git with. Currently my editor is code, and to set that config I will do something like git config global, because I want this to be a global config that I can use in all my projects, not just this project. And then I can set core.editor. The syntax is simple. You have core as the object and then you have this property. So core.editor, and I will set this to code weight, and that is why it's like this. Let me type something else here. Let's say I type codes weight. You can see it is codes weight here. The right command is code weight. Now if Git wants me to type any message, it's going to open my VS Code. And let me just show you a quick example. Now don't worry if you don't understand these commands, but I'm going to do git add and then I do git commit. Now when I do git commit, Git would expect me to type a message for my commit. If I should press enter, you can see that Git now opens this file for me and it opens it in my VS Code. If I had another code editor set up, then Git would use that code editor to open this file for me to make changes. But I'm not going to make any change. So it's going to say aborting commit due to empty commit message. You can also set your default branch. Currently my default branch is main. Maybe you want your default branch to be develop or something else. Again, don't worry if you don't understand default branches, but the same idea is git config global, then you have init.default branch, and then you have main. And there are a lot more options available for configuration in Git. So if you're following along with this course, I would recommend that you do the config for your name and your email, and you do the config for your editor, and you do the config for this init. So just do these 3 configs for now, and as we progress in this course, we would see other configurations that you can do. Now if you want to view all the configurations that you have, you can either open the global file like this. So in my case, I can use my VS Code to do code, and then I can go to user/Dillion Megida/.git config. Let me close this file. Now if I press this, this is going to open this global config on my code editor. So you can either open it like this, or you can go to your Finder, search for the file and do this, or you can open your local config by clicking on this and it will open. So you can either open it this way, or you can also view your config from the command line. So in the command line, I can do git config global lists, and it's going to list all my global configs. You can see user.name, Dillion, user.email, this, and the rest of them. I can also do git config local list, and it would list the local config I have here. You can see we have core and all these properties, user and these properties, and I have all of that here. So you can view your config like this, or you can even view a specific config. So if I should do git config and maybe I do user.name, it's going to show me Deeecode. Why? Now if you remember earlier, I said that your local config can overwrite your global config. So because I have username as Deeecode here, when I try to access git config username, it's going to show me this Deeecode here. But if I should do git config global user.name, then it shows me the global name, and I can use this to access any config that I want. Now if I should go to this config here, and let's just say I delete this for now. If I should run this git config user.name, now what I get is Dillion Megida. Why? Because I don't have any name configuration here, so Git is going to get that configuration from the global. So Git will first check the local, but if it doesn't see it in the local, it can then check the global. So like I said, with the local, you can configure Git for different projects, and then for the global, you can configure Git that would apply to all the projects you have on your device. Again, I'm going to say that there are a lot more configurations you can do with Git, but this is the basic configuration to get you started with Git and to also get you following along with this course. All right, now that this is out of the way, let's now begin to touch other fundamental concepts of Git like branches, stage changes, tracked and untracked files, and many more.